So my basic question is, what's the nature of your innovation challenge? Is it, let's be very simplistic here, to copy something that's known? There's a concept of health kiosks in the US. We need that in Finland. Okay, so then you need a kind of leadership that's probably quite meticulous, that is kind of like a Xerox machine, and can make sure that as we bring this model over here, we brought all the screws with us. I used to disassemble phones when I was a kid and forget the screws usually. So let's make sure. So very kind of, and perhaps a bit linear. Right? You might want a bit of accounting in there, that kind of mindset. But what if we're going to the moon for the first time? You probably need people who are fine with uncertainty, that recognize that they're going to have to test things out, they're going to then form the kinds of questions that they need to ask, and further refine, and through that iteration. So if your leadership is about managing uncertainty of a very different nature and leading through iteration, designers are very good at that. But if you need somebody who's like an accountant, very meticulous, and can copy something with complete fidelity, I'm not sure designers are best suited for that. I'm making gross generalizations about what a designer is.
Roger Martin,
a lot of people do.
Roger Martin, who I mentioned earlier on, has a thesis about design being about uncertainty and corporate leadership being about certainty, and about the need for designers to think about ways in which they can talk to corporate leaders or political leaders in a way which doesn't make them feel uneasy, and the need for some kind of empathy, or being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, which of course is a design quality as well. I do wonder sometimes whether the design world is worldly enough and empathetic enough in some ways to do that, which does seem to be a challenge.
I think a real big challenge. So yes, I think we bring a lot of attributes, like we have a cultural perspective, we do light ethnography, so to speak, like we have that kind of base. We are able to connect many kinds of things. So one of my favorite stories is the CEO of a corporation in the US that does depend undergarments, adult diapers.
All right.
And just taken over as CEO. And took the executive team together and said, I don't think we're innovating enough. And nobody could understand because they were the market leader. And so she put beers on the table. She asked everybody to put a diaper on. She closed the door and she said, everyone in this room is going to drink until they go to the bathroom in their pants. And for the first time, you had a room full of executives who recognized the emotional dimension of the diaper issue. They had thought about it in terms of supply chain and efficiency of materials and absorption rates and subcontracting, cost. They've never really emotionally connected with what it means and the social awkwardness and so on and so on. And suddenly the company became quite competitive in a very different way. So I frequently ask is, what's your diaper moment?
Right.
And I think designers are quite good at understanding what those diaper moments are around products and solutions, because they do that like technology work. Where I think we're quite weak is we've been a bit in the design bubble. And so if I take an average designer and put them in the public sector, I might as well put a Chinese in Finland. It's just, there's very little language in common. And I think that's our big challenge. It's actually bridging these. I would sort of preface it by saying that if you believe that the public sector has huge challenges, I hope you believe. If you believe that the public sector is incapable of redesigning solutions, and if you think that design has something to contribute to this equation, so if you sign off on all those boxes, then the question is how do you bring these two things together? I think one of the things that we need to really work really hard on is helping create career paths. Very few designers have the opportunity of actually working in the public sector. Flip side, very few public servants have had the opportunity of working on design projects and actually understanding that. So we need to do that. So the exchange program was built to create that, and so what we found we need to do is we need to find a host family, so a team in the public sector that's receptive to an alternative way of working. And then we need to try to recruit designers who have the ability to bridge this gap. And then by making them live together, like maybe like, I don't know, the French and the Germans in post-war or through Fulbright programs and other kinds of mechanisms, you begin to realize that actually these are just people and we have something to give each other. And what it does for the designer, it makes them more competent in applying their skill set in a more meaningful way in the public sector. And then what it does for the public servant, it allows them to understand the value of design and help, hence, be an advocate for design, help procure design in a smarter way. And so we've talked also about the need of building in the public sector, awareness, everyone knows what design is, understanding. People who do public procurement ought to understand what design is. So we don't hire, I don't know, a graphic designer to do, I don't know, a service design project, and we don't hire an architect to do, something else. We recognize what design is and how it functions. But we need a lot of that. That's very challenging right now.
Many of the failings in our range of public services are usually due to outdated or inappropriately designed systems, which is kind of your point about 18th century design in the 21st century. And it asks how good design practice can be brought to bear more often in the realms of policy making and public service provision.
I think there's a real danger that we're on a hype curve. Everyone's familiar with the Gartner hype curve. Design actually can provide a better pathway. There's a lot of promise to it. So we're going to hit the trough of disillusionment very quickly if we don't actually have sort of stellar projects that are saving people's lives at lower cost, quite literally. So there's promise. Design is very much at the margin still, and until we can save lives at lower cost, it's not going to be at the center. We got to figure out how we can bring that there. I think why has design sort of become fashionable? I think there's been maybe our community has matured. There's been a lot of people who've done a lot of good work in terms of bringing awareness. That's part of it. I think there's sort of Einstein's quote, which I'll paraphrase incorrectly, but
we all do.
Yes. Today's problems won't be solved by the logics that created them. And I think people are becoming more and more aware. When you look at the subprime problem and you hear somebody like Greenspan, and by the way, I'm amazed that more wasn't made out of his admission, that he had a flawed model of the world. You begin to realize that actually that logic that created the problem, can we really assume that it's going to be able to actually solve the problem? So I think people are looking, both out of sheer panic. I don't know about this big society stuff, but it seems like it's creating a bit of panic. Or Greece is creating a bit of panic. Right? There's many things that are creating panic. We need an alternative way because the traditional ways aren't delivering. So I think it's a kind of combination of things. But as I mentioned before, if you look at the work of Victor Papanek, Mr. Fuller, there were people who were advocating for this like eons ago. I think what happened to design is that generation of people, design got very politicized in the kind of 60s debate.
Yeah.
And so the established and business and so on pushed back on this kind of radical, politicized. And right now I think we've gone over that. And design is not politicized the same way. So I think we have an opportunity to get back together.
I think one could observe that, in a way, a lot of what you've been talking about is how do we reconcile people to austerity, how do we change their behaviour, and your examples about energy consumption, you could equally say, well, designers should be working with physicists and people who design large-scale systems to design new energy systems, and we should create as much energy as we need. We should not have to think about energy use at all. That's a design could be equally or even more profoundly involved in that. It's a decision that design should be involved in changing people's behaviours and lifestyles and so on. And you talk quite consciously about cultural change and so on. And in a way that does fit in more with current perspectives. We need to work out, or the government needs to work out how it can get us to consume less because it's not innovating to produce more. And on the other hand, government's quite alienated from ordinary citizens. Certainly in the UK, I can't speak about Finland. And you can see, every part of the British establishment, more or less, is under attack in one way or another, and yet design is this sort of, what should we say, pure thing. Designers are coming in, they're untainted and so on, and are able to relate to people in ways that politicians, civil servants, even the media aren't. And I wonder a bit if we're being invited in, but it's a bit of a sort of Faustian pact in a way that,
I think it's very challenging. I mean, you basically have a very entrenched giant ship that recognizes it needs to steer away from the iceberg, but doesn't have a steering system. It just can go ahead. And, you know, sort of wondered how you bring innovation into that equation to change things. I think it's actually quite ironic that a lot of the kind of debate in society is about changing behavior. Like citizens need to change behavior. Public servants need to change behavior. Politicians need to change behavior. There's less of that. But I think if you took an analogy of what happens where does innovation happen in the commercial sector? Most people would argue it's SMEs, like small industry. That's actually, in fact, the downfall of Nokia or big corporations is frequently the fact that they just become too successful at what they do, and they're too big to actually be nimble and change. So I think there's basically at least two strategies. Many more, but in my reductive world, there's at least two strategies. One is you spin off a group and you give it independence. You have no rules, and your job is to compete with the mothership. And if you become more successful, it's the disruptive approach. Then we'll slowly start unloading our ship, putting all our stuff on your ship. Right? And so that's how then we can continue to be competitive. The other way, which is quite frequent, is mergers and acquisitions. So big corporations go out and they try to buy small companies that are very creative because they want to bring those products with that culture in town. And I'm not taking what undoubtedly everybody would think, taking a position towards government as kind of outsourcing things. But it might be interesting to think of a kind of mergers and acquisitions approach from government, which is as innovation happens in the field, how do you begin to reel that in and make that the standard within government? Or can you spin out groups and give them independence? Do you have, as you might say in the U.S., the balls to spin somebody out and give them independence in this political climate? I think that's something that needs to happen. I'll give it just a quick example. In social services, we have one of our design exchange program placements. We work for a year there. And for various reasons, we have till the end of the year, so that's in about 5 minutes, to come up with a big success story. And so going back to outcomes, we need to radically change how things happen. So I sat down with the director and I said, fine, that's pretty impossible. There is an advantage, this is the whole discussion part, about having extraordinary limited time frames. It forces you, basically you have to throw the rule book out. So this is what I did with him. I said, okay, we're going to throw the rule book out. If you tell me we have 30 days to create a service that's unparalleled and completely different, we need to throw the rule book away. So no rules, and you put the best people in this team. And so when you create these spin-off independent, whether it's the skunk work idea or whatever it is, that's what you're consciously doing. Your job then is to consciously build bridges back to the mothership so that the mothership can learn from the freedom that's afforded somewhere else. I don't see much, and I'm being very reductive in my thinking, but I don't see much thinking about actually how the public sector could work, either with the kind of third sector or even the corporate world to create these pipelines of innovation, or the willingness to spin out and give independence. We're not going to be able to within this framework and this culture.